Okay, good morning, everyone. We are up to Perek Vav and Mishna Daled. Apologize for the delay. Again, due to some technical difficulties. Okay, so the Mishnah says like this: Me'emasai mutar adam likach yara b'mitzvah shvius. When is a person permitted to buy vegetables after Shemitah is over? Now, the issue here is like this. The issue here is that we have something called sfiach. Sfiach means aftergrowth, something that wasn't planted during the Shemitah year, but it's like from seeds that fell from the year before, but it grew during Shemitah. And the Torah does allow us to eat that sfiach, to eat that aftergrowth. But the Chachamim put a ban on any kind of aftergrowth of vegetables because people were claiming that it was aftergrowth when they had really planted it themselves. And therefore, they forbade any kind of vegetables that grow during Shemitah. Any kind of vegetables that grow during Shemitah, which would have been the sfiach, the aftergrowth, because you're not supposed to be planting during Shemitah. So now a person wants to come to a vegetable stand after Shemitah and buy vegetables. So some of those vegetables may very well be from Shemitah and forbidden. How does a person know? At what point can a person assume that the vegetables being sold at the vegetable stand are not the forbidden Shemitah vegetables, but actually the vegetables from the 8th year that are permitted to eat? So on that, the answer is Mishayase Kayotzeba. Once, and what Mishayase Kayotzeba means, once there is produced an amount similar to the old amount, meaning if you have a comparable amount of the new vegetables to the old vegetables, then the halacha says you're allowed to assume that's for the new vegetables. Now, going back for a second to this whole issue with the vegetables, even though we say that when it comes to vegetables, the laws that pertain to that vegetables per year follow when they're picked. And therefore, even if, let's say, something grew in the 7th year, if you pick it in the 8th year, what should be the problem? The answer is there was a rabbinic prohibition on anything that started growing in the 7th year because of the fact that, again, there was a problem of being able to know exactly, the people selling vegetables may say, oh, it was picked in the 8th year, but it really picked towards the end of the 7th year. And they want to pick at the end of the 7th year because of the fact that they want to have vegetables ready to sell at the beginning of the 8th year. And therefore, due to all the potential problems with the idea of following what the Torah allows us to follow, which is the year that the vegetable is picked. And again, if let's say it was picked in the 7th year, or let's say even if it was ready to be picked in the 7th year, even if it wasn't exactly picked in the 7th year, but it's ready to be picked in the 7th year, that's considered a Shemitah fruit, even if it was picked in the 8th year. So due to all the possible complications that arise with this, the Chachamim said that anything that grows in the 7th year, if it started growing in the 7th year, when it was picked in the 8th year, rabbinically is forbidden. So this is the problem that a person after Shemitah is facing. But once we get to the point where we're at a point in the year that we can say that there's enough 8th year vegetables that basically are comparable in their amount to the old ones, then already the halacha says we can assume that they are the new ones. So let me read you here from the way the Yad explains it. When vegetables of the crop planted after Shemitah have reached a comparable size and are being marketed, okay, they've grown to comparable size to the old ones and they're being marketed. At that time, it is just as likely that the vegetable is being offered for sale from a post-Shemitah planting as it is that they are from a Shemitah one. So that's one way of looking at it. You could assume at this point where the new vegetables are comparable in size, are being marketed to the old ones, you can assume at the stand that you're buying the permissible ones, not the forbidden ones. Then another aspect of this is the Yad brings down. Alternatively, even vegetables known to have begun growing during Shemitah become permitted once 8th year vegetables of the same size are available. This is because any vegetable still growing at that time, even if it had begun growing during Shemitah, must surely have added enough post-Shemitah growth to have exceeded the Shemitah growth and thereby nullify its prohibition. So here the point is that even if, let's say, you had a vegetable that began growing in the 7th year, but if this thing is still growing into the 8th year at a point that the vegetables that were planted during the 8th year are comparable to the old ones, then that means that the amount of this plant, this vegetable that began in the 7th year and continued in the 8th year, the amount of permissible part of the vegetable, meaning the part of the vegetable during the 8th year, is for sure going to be larger than the amount that grew during the 7th year. And then we apply the concept of bittul b'roiv. The majority nullifies the minority. And therefore, the minority part of the plant that has a status of Shemitah produce will be nullified by the majority part of the 8th year, of what grew in the 8th year of that vegetable. The point is that once you come to a point where the vegetables planted in the 8th year are comparable to the vegetables of the 7th year, then you know in this plant that began growing in the 7th year that there's more of it from the 8th year, and therefore the 7th year part becomes nullified. So that's what it means that you can buy the vegetables Mishiyasa Kayetzabai once the 8th year ones are produced, are comparable to the old ones. Now the Mishnah brings out the following case. Asa habakir hutar ha'othel. If the early ones that ripen are produced, then the later ones that ripen are permitted. So that means like this. If a certain species of vegetables ripens more rapidly in some locations than in others, then it can happen that in the early ripening location, the 8th year planting has already produced vegetables comparable to those in question, while in the late ripening location, they are not yet available. Okay, in one place, you may have enough of the new vegetables that are comparable to the old ones. In another place, you won't. In some places, they ripen quicker than other places. Nevertheless, the Mishnah teaches that once comparable vegetables are available in one location, it is permitted to buy even in a location where the local planting has not yet yielded comparable vegetables. If you have in one place that there's already enough vegetables from the 8th year that are comparable to the 7th year ones, and again in their size and marketability, then we say even in a place where we know in that place itself they haven't produced enough of the 8th year vegetables to compare to the 7th year, it's still going to be permissible to buy at the stand without asking any questions. This is because we assume that the ones being offered for sale have been imported from the location in which they have already ripened. We have a right to go ahead and assume that if somewhere you already have those 8th year vegetables that are comparable, you can assume that he imported it from there. Now, another explanation is that one may even buy vegetables known to have begun growing in the 7th year, as we discussed before. As long as somewhere the 8th year planting of a species has produced specimens comparable to those in question, we can be certain that everywhere the 8th year has exceeded the 7th year growth. That means even if the new vegetables themselves of the 8th year in this place haven't grown similarly to the old ones, but if we're talking about one that a specific vegetable began growing in the 7th year into the 8th year, if somewhere we know there's enough 8th year produce, meaning there's enough produce from the 8th year that grew in the 8th year to compare to the old produce, then any vegetable that began growing in the 7th year entering into the 8th year, you can already assume at this point that there's more 8th year growth of it than 7th year growth of it. So even though of the new 8th year produce, you don't have enough that are comparable to the 7th year produce in this specific place, but the vegetable that started in the 7th year going into the 8th year, you can assume there's more 8th year growth of it based on the fact that somewhere else you have 8th year growth in general that compares to the 7th year growth of that place. Okay, then the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Hiter Likach Yarak Mitzay Shviyas Miyad. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi of Judah the Prince permitted to buy vegetables after Shvius immediately. You did not have to wait for any time. Now, why was this? So the explanation is like this. This was because vegetables imported from outside Eretz Yisrael dominated the market, so that a purchaser could assume that those he intended to purchase were permissible imported ones. That's the first explanation of the Bartanura. The reason why Rebbe permitted right away is because the majority of vegetables being sold in the market were imported. They're from outside Eretz Yisrael. They were Shemitah fruit. And therefore, you can go ahead and say that you could just assume that's the majority and buy based on that. Now, they continue to explain here that not all Tanoim permitted importing vegetables from outside the country. They were concerned that clumps of foreign soil would be brought along with the vegetables. Since foreign soil is Tam Rabbinic decree, they fear that introducing it into Eretz Yisrael would create difficulties. Rabbi, however, permitted importing foreign produce, and accordingly, since it was abundant, he permitted immediate post-meat purchase of vegetables. So the way I understand this is that Rebbe was okay with importing vegetables from outside of Eretz Yisrael. Some people weren't. And sometimes weren't happy about it because they were afraid that some of the dirt from outside of Eretz Yisrael would enter Eretz Yisrael. And as we're going to see, there's a rabbinic decree that that dirt, literally the soil from outside of Eretz Yisrael, has a status of being impure. So they didn't want that soil coming in through the vegetables. And therefore, perhaps according to them, where they were, you wouldn't have this leniency of Rebbe because in those places, they didn't have imported vegetables. But Rebbe permitted imported vegetables. And therefore, where he was, the majority were the imported vegetables. And therefore, if the majority were imported, you have no problem. It's not the majority not Shemitah produce, and you can assume based on the majority that you're buying non-Shemitah produce. Now, there's a very interesting question they bring down here in the Yad Avram, and that is that according to this, if the point of Rebbe is that the majority of the vegetables in the market are imported, you can follow the majority, then why does this only apply during the 8th year of Shemitah? Why not apply on Shemitah itself? On Shemitah itself, you go to a vegetable stand and you don't know what this guy is selling, rely on the majority, because even in those years, the majority of the produce was imported. So what's the difference if it's the 7th year, the Shemitah year itself, or after Shemitah? We're dealing with the same problem. Are you buying Shemitah produce? Rebbe says you can rely on the majority to say that it's not Shemitah produce, it's imported. So why can't you rely on this in the 7th year? So the answer that's given is very interesting. The answer that's given is that the same way the Chachamim forbade the vegetables of their aftergrowth, vegetables that grow on their own during Shemitah, because they were afraid of people who would basically plant vegetables and claim that these vegetables were sfich and they were aftergrowth, the same problem would occur during Shemitah. If during Shemitah we say that you can rely on the majority to go ahead and buy any produce because the majority of it is from outside of Eretz Yisrael, then again, you're going to have people that are going to plant during Shemitah and claim that this is from outside of Eretz Yisrael. And in order to prevent this, the Chachamim said you can't rely on the majority during the Shemitah year. In the Shemitah year, you have to investigate where is this from. You can't just rely on the majority. And therefore, that would deter any of these people of trying to pass Shemitah fruit as outside of Eretz Yisrael fruit, because no one's just going to buy it, assuming that they're going to check into it and find out that it's not true. But after the Shemitah year is over, where we don't have this problem, then already you can go ahead. Or we wouldn't be concerned about this kind of problem for the 8th during the 8th year. Therefore, we say that you can rely on the majority. Okay. Now, another explanation the Bartenura brings down for Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's leniency is the following. And that is that within 2 or 3 days of the start of the 8th year, there are already available vegetables of a size comparable to ones which might have grown in the 7th year. Rebbe's point is like this. Rebbe's point is he let you go ahead and buy immediate. Whatever immediate means, immediate doesn't mean the second that Shemitah year is over, you go buy. You got to wait a couple of days. If you wait 2 or 3 days, okay, after the start of the 8th year, at that point, you could already assume that there are vegetables available of a size comparable to the ones which might have grown in the 7th year. That's interesting. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'm assuming you were talking about things that grew in the 8th, that were planted in the 8th year. So within 2 or 3 days of the start of the 8th year, there are already available vegetables of a size comparable to ones which might have grown in the 7th year. Well, just realized I'm not sure if I fully understand that. That's only a few days for that to happen. And anything that was already planted in the 7th year, okay, has that's Shemitah produce. And here the whole question is about saying that we have a comparable produce of the 8th year, unless this means specifically after 2-3 days. We're not talking about, so to speak, the whole 8th year crop, as much as things. Okay, I don't know. I was thinking about the things that we knew started growing in the 7th year, and they're going into the 8th year. Maybe after 2 or 3 days, you could assume that the majority of it grew in the 8th year. But that's not going to help you for the other problem of, let's say, vegetables that were picked right before the beginning of the 8th year. So I'm not sure exactly how this works, but that's the other explanation of the Rav, that within 2 or 3 days of the start of the 8th year, there are already available vegetables of a size comparable to ones which might have grown in the 7th year. Thus, Rabbi is simply stating that the limit given by the first Tana is very early in the 8th year. According to this, we don't have an argument. He's just saying what the Tana says, you got to wait. Wait only means a few days. Okay, let's now do the Sefer HaMitzvot. Mitzvahs Asay, this is Mitzvah Nun Ches, 58. Mitzvahs Asay Shakohanim Yavarchu Es Yisrael. Positive command for the Kohanim to bless the rest of the Jewish people. Shenemar, as it states, Kol Savarach Es Bnei Yisrael, so shall you bless the Jewish people. This is what Hashem was telling Aaron and his children. So shall you bless the Jewish people. It's a commandment. It's a positive commandment. And what do they say? Yirecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yor Hashem panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisra Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. V'mhaisef hakayin eza bracha acheret. Let's say the kohen decides that part of his brachas kohanim, he's adding a new one. He's adding his own. Oiver alav d'lo seisif. That kohen has now transgressed the prohibition of not to add to a mitzvah. The Torah says how to do the mitzvah. If you decide now, I'm adding another verse to this blessing, and you want to make it part of the blessing, part of the mitzvah, that is a prohibition of adding to a mitzvah. If the kohen does not go up when the chazan calls out kohanim, which means that's a call to the kohanim to come up, and he doesn't go up to do the bracha, to give the bracha, Bitul mitzvah saseizu, he has disobeyed this positive commandment. That's the point. And by doing so, va'over al shalosh mitzvahs, and he actually transgresses 3 commandments. It doesn't here mean 3 separate commandments, but 3 things that Hashem commanded them to do. Based on the verses, although it's 1 mitzvah, there are 3 commands in it. So therefore, if you don't fulfill the mitzvah, you're actually disobeying 3 commands that Hashem said, which are Kaisalarhu, so shall you bless, Omar Lahem, say to them, the Samu Hashemi, and shall place my name upon them. These are all, that last verse comes after the first verse says, Kaisvarachas b'nei Yisrael Omar Lahem. And then after the 3 verses of the bracha, it says, the Samu Hashemi b'nei Yisrael b'nei Avarachem, shall place my name on the Jewish people, and I will bless them. And therefore, we have 3 forms of how Hashem commands, Hashem charges the Kohanim to make the bracha, and if you disobey that, you are disobeying 3 charges of Hashem. And any kohen who gives the blessings, misbarech, he is blessed. Shenema, as the pasuk says, I will bless those that bless you. But Hashem said to Abraham, I will bless those that bless you. It's not just going on Abraham, it's going on all his descendants. And therefore, if Hashem says, I'll bless those who bless you, and the Kohanim bless the descendants of Abraham, then they get blessed. This applies at all places and at all times. Have a wonderful day. Take care.